All right, call the meeting to order, Ways and Means, and would you please do roll call? Close the doors, thank you.
Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Vaccaro,
Present.
Alderwoman Howard,
Present.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy,
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer,
Present.
Alderman Muhammad,
Here, that was me.
Alderman Odenberg, Alderwoman Boyd,
Present.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Chairman Vollmer.
Present.
8 present, you have quorum.
Okay, and we will excuse the Alderman not present for necessary absence. We have minutes to approve from last meeting, are they present?
They are.
Okay, someone make a motion?
I make a motion, we approve the minutes from the Wednesday, May 8th meeting.
Okay. Take a voice vote? Do we need to do that? No, we don't. Aye, everybody in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. These are new techniques at these meetings here. All right, we'll start with Board Bill number 1, sponsored by President Reed and myself, which is the annual budget. And we will,
Mr. Chair,
yes,
since we were actually going to have an extended hearing,
oh,
the transfer.
I forgot, but we have that transfer. We're going to listen to Board Bill 24 first with Mr. Valle. Pass those on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As the chairman said, I'm Jim Garavaglia, Deputy Comptroller for Finance and Development. With me today is my counterpart, Deputy Comptroller Beth Fitzsimmons on the accounting services side, and also Ryan Coleman from the Finance and Development side. We're asking you to consider today Board Bill number 24, which authorizes our annual borrowing of short-term notes for the fiscal year we're about to get into, fiscal year 2020. The notes, many of you will recall, assist the city in financing its cash flow requirements through the fiscal year, through the ebb and flow of cash receipts that we receive throughout the year. The board bill before you shows a maximum cap at $65 million, but our expected borrowing is expected to be somewhat less at $45 million. We have actually done some additional analysis and project that the actual deficit will run somewhere in the $52 million range, and it'll come most likely in the beginning of the fourth quarter in October of 2019. This is a borrowing that many of you who've been on the committee before will recognize, in that this is the 36th consecutive year that we do this type of borrowing. What else I can tell you, but that's, in a nutshell, that's what the board bill is all about.
Sorry about that. Where are we at emergency? Sorry.
I think it's just gonna be, does anybody have questions?
Oh,
I think I'm first.
sorry about that. Okay. Since I'm familiar with it, so are there any questions, Mr. Carvalho, starting with Alderman Davis, not here? Alderman Vaccaro.
So, yeah, I know we do it every year, and I know it's so we can pay our bills in a timely manner, I get that. The one thing I'm just gonna ask quickly, when we borrow this, when we pay it back, what is the cost of, you know, and I'm trying to just remember, I know it changes year to year, but what's the cost gonna be for the borrowing of the money?
Generally speaking, when we issue debt, it's going to be subject to what the market is going to dictate to us in terms of, we'll go in and try to get the lowest possible interest rate on the bonds that people will actually buy. So Alderman, I can't give you a hard and fast answer, something that could be quoted at this point in time.
What was it last year?
I don't know that, but we can find out, and I'll get back to you.
It was 3% bond rate, but with the premium, it was much less of
So
a basis points. we actually are getting ready to pay back the, last year's was a $66 million borrowing.
Right.
And we're getting ready to pay that back on May the 30th. So what happens is most of the time, you have enough interest earned on when you're not needing the money, that you're actually, to earn interest on it. In the budget, there's a $300,000 line item to subsidize it, so it will cost the general fund approximately $300,000.
Okay, that's what I was curious. I realize we have to borrow to pay our bills
Right.
timely, I get that.
So
But I
we're
was just
borrowing at less than
curious.
3%.
But, so roughly, the cost is paid back, and it costs about $300,000. I was just curious.
All right, no further questions? Alderman Howard?
So the fiscal note defines the $300,000 approximate that may cost to do these, right? That was verified by Mr. Payne?
Right.
That's, okay,
All right,
that's all I have.
okay. Alderman Murphy?
No questions, thank
All right, Alderman Spencer?
you. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what I gave you this sheet.
That's not, I have the list up here if you want on that list. You're on this list.
That's okay, I just have a quick question. Of course, I'm new to Ways and Means, but can you explain, well, can you tell me, like, you said this has been happening like for the 36 consecutive year, but you said that last year it was roughly like 66 million that was borrowed. What attributed to the decrease for this year at 45 million?
Well, I think there's a number of things, and my counterpart might be best to speak to that.
Okay, so if you remember, we're building up our.
And they jumped there.
You want to be on camera?
You gotta be on camera.
So if you remember, our goal
who you
in the
are.
city is to build up our fund balance, and which has been happening
You might want
really well this year. Pardon me?
You might want to say who you
Say your
are.
name,
Oh, I'm
please.
Bev Fitzsimmons, Deputy Comptroller. I'm sorry. So we got $10 million from the parking division last year that was earmarked specifically for the fund balance. Okay, so the fund balance on a cash flow look is not like it's spent or kept aside separately. It's part of the cash flow versus what you say is available for the budget type idea. So you have the $10 million from the parking fund that increased it. You also have what Mr. Payne has started putting in the budget last year was the fund balance reserve line item, which is 3.4, I believe. Also part of that is the 27 pay reserve. Every time we add to that, that's part of our cash flow, because you got to remember, this is a cash flow. It's not a budgetary transaction type idea. So that's 900 and something thousand added to our fund balance. So every time our fund balance goes up, that allows us a little bit less that we should borrow. Now as Jim mentioned, our deficit looks like, if you estimate it, and it's an estimate, $52 million deficit, and we're borrowing 45, but we feel like with the EcoDevo tax extra money setting aside, that we've been building up for the transportation portion of it, it's an available interfund borrowing. Okay.
Thank you, no further questions.
All right. Now, Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions,
All right.
thank you.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only question really is, in a way to understand this longitudinally, last year, again, this goes along with Alderwoman Hubbard's question, 66 million. How has that changed over time? Do we have sort of an analysis of just how that's looked over the 36 years? Is this something that's standard?
Over the years, it has fluctuated from what I can remember, from 30 million up to, I think 66 was probably our highest one that we had last year.
Okay.
And then and it kind of just bounces according to how our budget goes. But this is the first year we really have seen a decrease, and it's all attributed really the goal of the city to reach its fund balance level.
It's the lowest
reserve.
it's been in quite a while, maybe longer than 5 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Is this standard practice for a city our size to borrow money through a bond issued at the beginning of the budget practice?
Right, and it's less than a 12-month period that we'll pay this back, so we'll be borrowing on, I believe, July the 2nd this year, repaying it June the 1st. We usually did the full 12 months, but we found that we didn't really need the money in June, so it's better to cut it off a little earlier. It's just that much less interest that we owe. But no, like I said, this is back in the good old days, and I hate to date myself, but you know, when we didn't have this, we literally were paying vouchers according to how much money we had in the bank, and it was very tense and very cumbersome. We'd line them around the room, and, you know, then first out for, you know, first in, first out type idea. So this is a common practice because of the way the taxes come in. You know, you start hitting your property taxes at the end of the year, and that type of thing. Your earnings tax comes in heavier around the first quarter of the calendar year, that type of thing.
It might be helpful for those of us new to Ways and Means to look at that over time, just so we have a better understanding that this is standard
how
for
much?
our city.
Oh, of how much we borrowed? It is in the official statement,
Oh,
but I
great.
can,
I can dig
there's
that
like
out.
a 5-year history of
Sure.
it in the official
That-
statement.
I think that would answer my question. And then just
Okay.
lastly, with the fiscal note, it just has expenditures of 1.6 million, additional revenue of 1.3 million, and then the net would be that 300,000 that we talked about. Does this generate additional revenue?
That's just, that is the estimate of the interest that we'll be needing to pay.
I understand.
And then less the, you know, what we expect to earn in interest.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay.
Alderman Mohammed, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Alderwoman Boyd,
No question.
no questions?
I have one more.
Okay, we'll go back to Alderwoman Howard.
In looking at the reduction of what's projected to be borrowed, is this due to, I know you mentioned the additional funds coming from the parking department, the treasurer's office. Have there been additional belt tightening measures that have resulted in having to borrow less?
Well, I think it's our estimate for the end of the year. I expect our revenues to be a little bit higher this year than projected, and because of a couple different things that happened over the year, you know, the Argyle board bill that you guys passed into ordinance and that type of thing. So there's gonna be a little bit more money coming in, so we're expecting a little bit there. And it can be, you know, it's just a general estimate of what we look at for, as if we're spending the full amount of the budget plus what we expect. So it can be, the number can be adjusted accordingly, you know, and like I said, at this point, because we start doing these numbers in March, you know, then we try to update them with April, and we still got that 2 month that we have to guess.
Maybe that's a better question for Mr. Payne when he gets the stage.
All right.
Okay, that's all, that's all.
Alderman Farr, you have another question?
I do, not to make it go long, but when you talk about the EcoDevo money, you can borrow from that?
No, it's interfund borrowing. It's all in one general pool. So we're not borrowing money from EcoDevo. We are not. You got to remember, all the money goes into what's called the general pool of money. And if we would have a deficit, it's one big pot of money held. The separation of the funds is strictly on a general ledger level.
Okay, I was just a little confused.
No, we're
Okay.
definitely not borrowing that money, per se, you know.
All right. All right, no further questions. And let you close on this, Mr. Garvelia?
I think that's pretty much it. Again, you know, this is something that we do every year. By the fact that it's a lower number, I think that signifies progress that we've made, and that you know, we hope to continue to have a good market when we go to price this, so that we're able to continue to borrow at that under 3% rate as well.
All right. With that, I'll entertain a
I'll
motion.
make a motion, we pass board bill number 24, with the due pass
Do I hear a second?
recommendation.
Second.
All right, Judy, please take roll.
Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Vaccaro,
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy,
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer,
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad,
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderwoman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Chairman Vollmer.
Aye.
Yes, she did.
Yes.
She called me out.
Oh, I was like, I heard Clark Hubbard.
So 2 Hubbards.
8, right, that's
The 2 Boyds.
right.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the
Thank you,
committee,
Mr.
appreciate your
Ryan.
due pass recommendation.
All right, with that, we'll, Mr. Payne, you're in the hot seat then, sir.
Yeah.
We'll give some colorful handouts for us?
Yeah, hello, Mr. Chairman.
right.
Thank you. Actually, I was actually too cheap. We bought black and white, but then when I saw someone could do this for us, we did it. So,
For the record, state your name so the camera can see you and
yes,
smile.
I'm Paul Payne, the budget director. Thank
All right, thank you very much.
Oh, we get more paper?
you. I'll wait.
We kill a lot of trees around here.
Yeah, we surely do.
I guess you got this on a big slideshow.
All right.
We're gonna wait for that to get around.
We have enough of them?
Yes, we do.
All right.
Oh, I'm sure, Paul, this could be online, isn't it?
File.
Yeah, everything I'm handing out is online.
Is already online. Okay,
So if you
great.
need hard copy, we've got it, otherwise.
Thank you.
No secrets?
Slideshow for
Yep.
sale.
Got it. Thanks. Thanks so much.
All right.
All right, starting on the second slide here on the presentation I just circulated. The total proposed budget for FY 2020 is $1,149.2 million. That's an increase of 3% over the previous fiscal year. And the chart, the box you see below that breaks it out by fund source. The general fund at $519.3 million is almost flat. It's a 0.3% increase. Most of the activity you're going to be seeing in this budget in terms of changes would be in the special revenue category, which is a total of $184.1 million. It's 4.4% increase. That includes those special funds such as the use tax, which is up $3.4 million, special fund for corrections, which is an increase of $3.7 million, the gaming fund's up slightly, the public safety sales tax, which is up about $0.8 million, and then the Prop P fund, which is up $3 million, and the economic development sales tax fund, which is actually down by $2.4 million. In the grant fund categories, it's $69.9 million. It's an increase of 13.7%. That includes just mostly grant funds received by departments. Police department's up $1.8 million in that category. Health division is also up $3.7 million, and human services is up $2.5 million. The debt service fund at $5.8 million, that's basically flat. What that is those are the amounts that we budget for our general obligation bond debt, which is almost the same as the previous fiscal year. Capital improvement funds at $36.4 million, that's down 2.9%. Mostly that reflects the reduced debt payments, particularly on the Justice Center, which have gone down this year. There was also a small deficit we were anticipating from the sales tax, which is at the third quarter was slightly trailing. Enterprise fund accounts that includes both water and the airport at $246 million. It's a 5.8% increase. That includes the water division increase of $9.7 million. So you'll see in the water division they have a significant increase related to capital projects. They're appropriating, they have appropriation of a special fund within that category that they're expecting to do some major capital fund improvements, and so that's been incorporated in their operating budget. And the airport's up $3.7 million. And in the internal service funds categories, $87.7 million. That's a 3.5% increase. Just for your benefit, the internal service funds are funds that for departments charging each other. That's not discretionary monies. Most of that would be either the funds that the departments pay to buy their gasoline. You'll see it in the internal service fund, and they pay equipment service to buy gas for them. But more importantly, it's the health insurance funds and all that every department contributes into the internal service, and then that internal service pays the premium. So that's not a discretionary account so much. And you can see in the chart below, the general fund remains about 45% of the overall budget. The next slide sort of gives us a snapshot of where our major tax revenues are doing this fiscal year. Earnings tax revenues were up 1.5%, though that was lagging the estimate through the third quarter. Payroll tax was up 4.3%, and sales tax, which is not a historically strong grower, is only up 0.5%. Overall, we were close to near budget estimates. You can see these are quarterly. These charts indicate changes from the prior year's quarter. On the earnings tax, for instance, we've seen that individual receipts were up 4.1%, but corporate was down 32.2%. Now that may be a bit of an anomaly because most of the corporate is paid in the fourth quarter, so we can track that, but what's positive about this is that the individual portion was up 4.1%, which tracks pretty well with the payroll tax, which was up also 4.3%. So we've seen some payroll growth and salary growth this year, which is a good thing. And in terms of long-term rates, the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year growth rates on the earnings tax is between 2.1% and 2.6% category. On the sales tax, again, sales tax is not historically a growth tax for us, 1% or less. The sales tax year-to-date was up 0.5%. A 10-year growth rate is 1%. On slide 4, this is just sort of an indication of each year when we come out and do the budget, say, okay, what's our budget gap? How much are we, because we usually have a budget gap, and you look at what our projected revenues are and what our known increases are and what our gap is. Well, typically we get budget requests, and budget requests always exceed the budget revenues of about $20 million gap. Surprise, right? But this year, usually we start with a rather large double-digit gap. This year was surprisingly benign. It was in the single-digit category, and let me walk you through that a little bit. On the beginning revenue base, we had a total of $517.5 million. Right now, I didn't make any adjustments for 2019. We're pretty close to estimates there. We had some one-time or declining sources. We had some additional monies from the parking as well as some state reimbursements of about $4.3 million. And then we get some net growth. Major taxes of about 1.6%, although the rest is somewhat flat. So that gives us a starting point of about $519.3 million. So then you go through the increases and decreases. Police, we know we have a pay matrix and civilian pay increase and health and overtime and health insurance. That's about $2.5 million. But the police pension costs, because of the market performance in the past year, were actually down 1.3. And there's also a debt service amount that went down. I'll be talking about pensions in detail a little bit later. Fire, the same dynamics. We had matrix and civilian pay increases and health insurance increase of about $1 million. And fire pension costs, particularly with the old plan, it went down, including $3.9 million. Then we got non-uniform pay increases, that's for everybody else, of about $2.8 million. And then some lease and debt obligations, Carnahan up 0.3, personnel, they've got a salary survey they're conducting at $200,000. We have the city councilor increase in expected judgment payments of about $1 million. It's going to be, Microsoft did not renew, is not continuing its maintenance of older software as well as some of the old PCs. So there's going to be a major influx of funds needed to replace some PCs this year of about $700,000. The comptroller saw some building insurance premium increase of about $100,000. Now, we did see a decrease in the Board of Election Commissioners' budget. As you know, in this current fiscal year, we had 4 scheduled elections. Next year, there's only 1, which is a presidential primary. Streets, we have some increases related to salt replenishment because we used a lot this year. And we've seen an increase in disposal costs of refuse. Facilities management, we did also see some utility cost increases. And then equipment services, rising costs of some fuel and repair costs. So that gives you a $521.8 million base, which is about a $2.5 million gap. Still a gap, pretty small compared to historic standards. So the next slide, I show you the estimate of how we got there. We have about some scattered budget cuts of about $1 million, and then some special fund revenues which are overperforming $1.5 million to bridge that $2.5 million gap. So some of the increase in one of the funds that's overperforming this year is the use tax. So while the sales tax isn't growing much, the use tax is. And so we've allocated $1 million in that to help offset our general fund balance, our general fund deficit. Gaming fund was up. Public safety sales trust fund was up a bit, and our public safety sales tax balance was up. On the next slide, 6, sort of go through by department. You can see, other than the increases and decreases I talked about earlier, in general government and finance, the mayor's office was down a position. They're up $100,000 overall. Personnel, insurance, consulting, that was down $200,000. City councilor staffing was up at $400,000, and controller had some miscellaneous contractual service increase of about $100,000. In the non-departmental accounts are the accounts that aren't specific to any one department. They have a lot of debt service in there as well. We've got the second year of the state audit. We've got that at $600,000. We don't know exactly what the final cost of that's going to be, but that's in line with estimates. Assessor subsidies down by $100,000. And with the decline in the Justice Center payment, the NGA payment this year is budgeted under the capital fund. In Parks and Recreation, you see a decline of at 1.1 million. Most of that's the shift of the debris program, which occurred this fiscal year. So the street department picked up those services, and so that was a move of 20 positions down to the street department. Judicial office is primarily flat, although the sheriff, we added 5 deputy positions. That's about $300,000 worth of increases, and the circuit courts and the circuit attorney primarily, as I mentioned, flat. County offices, you'll see small increase in medical examiners, contractual services, and the recorder was down 3 positions. In streets, as I mentioned before, the debris program has been moved from the Parks Department, so that was an addition of about $1.1 million. Towing had some one-time vehicle purchases, so that's down about $300,000, and the director shifted 1 position to PDA. In the Department of Public Safety, fire supplies and contractual increases up about $300,000, and corrections see some contractual increases with some net salary savings for a small increase there. BPS, other than the increases in ESD as well as facilities management is up 1 position. So that's about a net $1 million reduction. Moving to slide 7, this is an illustration of general fund revenue and its estimate by source. The earnings tax, which remains our largest source of general fund revenue, is estimated at $180 million, which is a 2% increase. Again, in line with those 3 to 5 and 10-year ranges. Property tax at $62.4 million is estimated at a 1.5% increase. Its 10-year growth rate is at 1.6%. The sales tax at $54.8 million is estimated at 1%, which again is close to its long-term growth rate. The payroll tax at $40.2 million, it's 1.5%. Got that a little less. The earnings tax, historically it trails the earnings tax, although this year it has been pretty close on the withholding side. Franchise utility tax category at $53.2 million is estimated at $1.5 million, just reflecting mostly inflationary increases. A decline in intergovernmental receipts, $25.1 million, and that's the $25.1 million in total is a 9.9% decline. Mostly, we had a surge of prison reimbursement payments this year with the state catching up. Typically, we got over $8 million this year. That was mostly a backlog, and we're estimating a little over $5 million next year. License tax categories primarily flat. Those are fixed rate fees. Departmental fees and fines at $58.6 million. That's 1.4% increase, 1.4% decrease. We did have some receipts from the from the U.S. Marshal that was a surge this year, which we'll maintain next year. Won't be as high. We also get some one-time payments in the police department that are not recurring as well. And then the other category is mostly transfers. It includes some of the convention and tourism taxes. And as well as payments that we received this year for the transfer we received from the parking meter division. It was a one-time source. So all those transfers are at $31.2 million. It's a 3.4% decrease. And you can see by the chart below, earnings tax remains our largest source at 35% of the general fund revenue. On the expenditure side, I'm not going to repeat everything I went through earlier, but you can see by the department categories, general government 28.9%, $28.9 million, that's a 9.6% increase. That includes the increase in the PFPC of $1 million, as well as the personnel study of $200,000 at personnel department, and ITSA's increase for a computer equipment. The finance department, that's up 4% at $9 million. That's an insurance increase of $100,000. And supply department had a position increases of 2 positions. Non-departmental, $36.3 million, it's down 3.1%. Again, parks, that decline of 4%, that's mostly the move of the debris program to streets. The big drop in county offices at 8.5%, that's the election board with only the 1 election. And that's about some of the major changes. Yeah, the 4.3% increase in streets, again, that's the debris program moving from parks. And you can see from the chart below, public safety represents 56% of the general fund budget. Moving to slide 9, these are some of the proposed changes in some of our major special fund categories. As I mentioned, the local use tax is outperforming this year. It's up 13% year to date, and it's revised at $35.8 million. The FY20 estimate is 35, again, pretty much, we estimate it flat for next year. Affordable housing, the allocation for affordable housing, which by formula at the minimum is $5 million. This budget includes an addition of to a total of $6 million in new funds, plus it's reappropriating $600,000 that were freed up from non-spent previously appropriated funds. So its total budget for affordable housing is $6.6 million. The Healthcare Trust Fund, as usual, gets its full allocation of $5 million. In building demolition, full allocation would be $3 million. This budget proposes $3.825 million, which is a $900,000 increase over last year. In terms of the excess use tax fund categories, is those items which are not funded in either of the other three categories. There is a new allocation for Forestry Division of $350,000 to address some of its weed and debris needs. The rest of them are itemized there. Refuse at $700,000, Housing Conservation 2.3, Police at $11 million, which is a $1 million increase and helps with our general fund balance there. The Health Division at $7.4 million and Human Services at $400,000. So the total budget with those excess use tax funds is $22.2 million, brings that $37.6 million for the use tax fund. In terms of the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, FY20 estimates are $21.1 million, plus we also have an appropriation of $471,000 in unspent funds this year. So you can see that is being allocated per the ordinance, which allocates 60% of that to transit, which is $12.66 million, which, as the comptroller mentioned, is going and accumulating in a fund right now, which is not being spent. Neighborhood stabilization is 10% of that total, with a $471,000 balance from the current fiscal year, going to PDA and CDA at $2.52 million. The workforce development allocation of 10% is $2.11 million, and you can see that it's allocated to both Slate and Human Services. Public safety infrastructure at 10%, at $2.11 million as well. There's three major items there. One for funding the 911 system enhancements that we were embarking on this fiscal year. There's also funding for a SEMA emergency warning system, and then as well as financing for a PSAP financing. The PSAP is a public safety answering point. That's for those who need a definition. But what that is funding a combined service where all the those which are the dispatchers, the fire dispatchers, police dispatchers, EMS dispatchers can go into a single place. And so that's what that is. That's a major initiative undertaken on public safety. And the city infrastructure, which also gets 10% of $2.1 million, that's allocated to the city's capital fund. So an economic development sales tax is $21.51 million. I also have a little note there indicating the gaming fund. It was up 4.6% through the third quarter, with a budget of $7.8 million, which is up $0.4 million. I've seen the gaming fund, for those who've been on Ways and Means for a while, you've seen those revenues. They were up and then they went down for a number of years. The last couple of years, we've seen a recovery. The last couple of months, I've seen this flattening out. So we're going to keep an eye on that. It's gone up and down.
Too many pennies left.
Yeah. On slide 10, a discussion of the allocation for Prop P funds. If you recall, Prop P had two components. There was a half-cent sales tax piece, and that's estimated at $21.1 million. And then there was a use tax, which was related to the increase in the sales tax, which is estimated at $4.1. I can tell you that the revenues this year are a bit higher than what we estimated, mostly because with these sales taxes, as well as economic development sales tax, they're not subject to TIF. So it's not directly proportional to the capital fund. It's more, you've got a little bit higher because it's not being TIFed. So the total revenue for the fund is $25.2 million. So in allocating those, as you recall, your ordinance gave allocations percentages to each piece of those revenues. And the sales tax portion, the police department was allocated 66%. So we're appropriating that's $13.9 million of the estimated revenues, plus an estimated balance of $0.8 million, for a total of $14.723 million. Now that's the second year of this payment for the current year's pay increase of $6,000, plus it allows $1.2 million for equipment purchases within their budget, and you'll see that in the line item. The fire department was allocated 28% of the sales tax. That's $5.9 million. And we're also appropriating a balance of $500,000, which also includes $1.2 million for equipment, as well as the pay and benefits of this year's pay increase. So the total budget for them is $6.371 million. And the circuit attorney receives 6% of that sales tax, which is $1.3 million. So the sales tax portion of that Prop P allocation is $22.36 million. Under the use tax portion, there was 25% was allocated to after-school programs and jobs. The youth jobs at $325,000 and youth cadets at $700,000. That's about $1.025 million. You'll find the youth jobs, I believe that's in Director of Public Safety's budget, and the youth cadets, that's a cadet program at the police department to hire cadets interested in law enforcement. Circuit attorney gets 7.7% of the use tax portion. That again pays for state staff pay and contractual services of about $300,000. Recreation programs get 25%. And last year, as you recall, we added 11 recreation program positions, and there are some contractual programs as well, just shy of $1 million in this budget. Building demolition also receives about $700,000, or just under $675,000 as part of its allocation. And then 25% was also allocated to social works and mental health. Human services, that's in the Human Services Department, and that'll get slightly over $1 million. So that's just over $4 million in the use tax portion. In terms of our capital budget, which is on slide 11, the capital budget, as I mentioned, is $36.4 million. It's a slight decrease, $1.1 million of the previous fiscal year. But I should point out that everything's fully allocated in terms of the half-cent programmed allocations, and all our debt service needs are met. We do have a proposal to enter into a lease purchase of about $8 million in rolling stock, continue replacing some of our service vehicles, which we are always behind in trying to replace, so that is included. You can see it by the chart below. Existing citywide debt is $14.7 million. So there's not much discretionary funds on the citywide accounts. Other citywide capital of $1.2 million. It includes some allocation to BPS and for $350,000 just for miscellaneous building repairs. We also have the forestry ash tree initiative in there at $550,000, and some other ITSA equipment, $150,000. You can see the ward improvements. That's $9.15 million. It's pretty much flat with last year. Neighborhood parks, major and neighborhood parks is $7.6 million, and rec center just under $600,000 and $550,000. Police department improvements includes $1.8 million, mostly for existing debt service, as well as some additional rolling stock lease debt. Total debt service in the capital fund is $20.4 million, or it's about 56% of the total capital fund budget. Moving to the next slide, on slide 12. This is just an indication of where the changes are in personnel totals by department or by fund. Personnel totals, general fund is actually 5,024 positions. It's actually up by 17. Some of the increases I mentioned, it's up by 1, sheriff is up by 5. In the fire department, you're going to see an increase of 6, but that's actually because a SAFER grant expired this year, and it was prorated, so that now all of them are in general fund. And so you're going to see some of those changes. The recorder is down by 3, et cetera. In the special fund categories, it's 188 positions, 4 positions increase. Some of the special parks fund, that's up by 1. Economic development PDA is up by 2. Some of the grant fund increases you're going to see, there's some increases in the police department, as well as in the community development block grant is down by 4. Of course, the SAFER grant, which is in that category, which expired, is now in the general fund, so that also down by a number of positions. And then the enterprise fund category is 899 positions. That's up by 13. Water is up by 3, and airports up by a combined, I believe that's 9. And then comptroller is up by 2 in that fund. So that's a total increase of 45 positions from all funds. And you can see the bar below, public safety being the largest of those department categories. Slide 13 is just an indication over the last 10 fiscal years. How does that compare? Overall, we're still down by about 433 positions since FY10. The largest reduction occurring in the general fund, which is down just over 246 positions there. Special funds were down by 25, grant funds down by 91, and enterprise funds down by 71. On slide 14, pension costs. This is a slide I update every year just to give us an idea, because I think it's an important issue regarding how we manage our costs over time. Pension costs, including the Prop P increase, is this year budgeted in FY19. We're seeing actual decrease between FY19 and FY20 of about $4.6 million. The total estimate per the PRS system is $38.8 million. FRS, FRP, which is two systems, is $13.8 million, and $28.7 million for ERS, for a total of $81.3 million. Most of the decrease, as I mentioned, is twofold. One of them is the pension debt, one pension debt issue that we issued in 2008. It expired this year, so expiring next year, so we no longer have a payment for that. That's about $2.4 million. And then FRS, which is the frozen fire retirement plan, is actually 100% funded right now. Knock on wood, but that means no contribution for the coming year. And if you're interested in all the details of those calculations, you can see those on slide 15. And we'll walk you through some of the key ones there. As I mentioned, the employee retirement system, market value of $827 million, actuarial 831, with unfunded liability, with total liabilities of $996 million. So total unfunded liability of $165 million. That's about an actuarial on an actuarial basis of 83.4%.
That's good.
It's above 80%. Of course, we are in our 10th year of economic expansion. So when we were in the 90s, we were 100% funded. So you look at that and say, hey, you would like it to be higher where we are in this stage, but it's not bad. Under the fire retirement system, again, we have two systems. One is the FRS system, which is the system that was closed, which is frozen as of 2013. And then we've got the new system of FRP. As I mentioned, the fire retirement system at $477 million. We've got, on a market value basis, $473.8 on an actuarial basis. Liability 471, so actually that negative 2.8, that means you're overfunded. So we actually have 100% funding on the frozen plan as of the last valuation. That means no contribution for that system. Now in the fire retirement plan, that's assets of $77 million and $74.8 million on an actuarial value, with liabilities of $121 million, with unfunded liabilities of $46.3. That's a funded status of 61.8% on actuarial value. That actually is not bad either, because that's only 5 years old. This was a new plan. We started from scratch. So it's something that's going to be going up gradually over time. So actually, somewhat pleased with the progress of the funding of that plan, given how new it is.
You're happy with it.
Well, I'll get to the summation on these in a minute, but now police retirement at $796.2 million at market value, $788.6 in actuarial value. It has total liabilities of about $1 billion there. So your total unfunded liability is $217.8 million. That's under 80%, 78.4%. So it's not as funded as well as the other two, and 79% on a market basis. I would say that we, again, from a funded status, it's not bad. We would like to be better given where we are in the economic cycle, but the cost remains high. And if you look at the total cost in terms of a total per individual participant, for instance, on police, it's over $30,000 per individual, and fire it's over $19,000 per individual. Now, employee retirement, that's $7,000, but we're also paying FICA. You throw in FICA, you might be $11,000 or $12,000, something like that. But so it's still expensive, and so and I should mention again, we're in the 11th year of the economic expansion. So pension reform is still something we've done that with fire. It's still something that should be on everyone's radar screen in terms of how we get these costs under control going forward. And the market can turn any time. Going from that dire situation, I do on slide 16. I'll say this is actually a good news story in terms of our fund balance. Beverly mentioned this earlier. One of the things, the important things about a fund balance, and I'll rehash what we went through in the last recession. In the last recession, and you can see there on this chart, if you look back at FY09, we went through 2 years where we drew down about $18 million in the fund balance, simply because revenues were so bad, and it sort of dropped off in a cliff. So if you ever wonder what's the importance of having a fund balance, that we have a history there, it would show you that pretty right off. So typically, we have, historically, we've basically set out a minimum fund balance reserve of 5% of our general fund budget. Well, I'm happy to report this year we actually made that. So with the infusion of funds from the parking meter division, which was $10 million, plus our set aside of 1.5% of pay, that gives us $3.4 million. So we're actually at the beginning of the current this current fiscal year, somewhat about $31.2 million. Now, the flip side of that is that 5% was always our minimum, because most rating agencies and such, I've seen recommendations as high as 2 months of reserves. That seems a little high, but 10% is not out of the picture. And so I would suggest in what we're trying to achieve, you're trying to get 10% of your budget in terms of reserves set aside. So that's something that we're going to continue to contribute toward. So you'll see in this budget, we continue that 1.5% of pay as a budget item. That should be another $3.4 million. Plus, if there's any leftover monies as well, half of those will also go to the reserve. So that's something that we want to keep on doing. And I think having made some progress in that category or in this issue is a positive development. It'll be looked on favorably by the rating agency. Something we need to continue. So finally, to recap, the FY20 budget's $1,149.2 million, a 3% increase. It's got the second year budgets for the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, as well as the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, and use tax known as Prop P, as specified per ordinance. Local use tax funds are fully allocated for affordable housing, plus $1 million, and building demolition, plus $825,000, as well as all capital funds for ward and rec centers are funded according to the ordinance. General fund at $519.3 million is a 0.3% increase. That bridges a modest gap as compared to prior years, including a mix of additions and reductions to maintain balance. And it maintains the annual mechanism for strengthening the fund reserves. I always say what our continued longer-term challenges are in this budget. Obviously, we're entering the 11th year of the economic expansion, so the next recession is something you always want to keep in mind. Strengthening our revenue growth base as well as our reserves, continuing pension reforms, and financing of capital infrastructure needs. And that's the end of my presentation.
In a nutshell.
That's in a nutshell. You're right. And I'll be willing to entertain any questions.
All right, we will start with Alderwoman Davis. Any questions of Mr. Payne?
No, I thought that the presentation was very thorough. One of the things that we have talked about for the last 10 years is having the ability to have a balanced budget without fear what may happen if we didn't have the reserve. So we're in a good place.
Alderman Carl, you're next.
Well, and a lot of that reserve came from what, the Tashara money that we got? the
Yeah,
one
this
time?
year we received $10 million from the parking meter fund, so that was a
Right.
good one-time infusion.
Was that
So-
one time?
So the other question, I think, and I just, maybe because I just didn't see it, the $1 million public safety money, that goes to public safety, we give to different groups?
Yeah, that is the, you're referring to the crime prevention funds, which are in Fund 1123, it's Public Safety Sales Tax Fund.
Right,
Not to be
right.
confused with this new one, it's the
Right.
one from 2008.
Right.
That is fully allocated in its budget under Fund 610,
So
Department
it's going to be
610.
the full million? this
Yeah,
year?
it is the full.
Because I know it was going like this for a while, but.
We've, in the last couple of years, held that pretty flat. There is a position charged against that, but
Right.
if you look at the total budget, it's $1 million.
It's $50,000
Yeah,
position,
that's
that's
the
what I thought. Yeah. No other questions?
No further questions. Alderwoman Howard, you're next.
Talking about having a reserve, when each department, if they say they don't allocate or they don't hire people for positions that they've been allocated, does that money remain with them for perpetuity, or how is that?
No, by charter, unlike, well, other than the capital fund and certain grant funds and things, by charter, in the general fund, if it's not spent, it reverts. to the general fund balance. Now, there are some cases where if you enter into a contract and you've got signed papers and all that, the controller's office can encumber that for the following year so you don't take the hit next year. Not much of that happens, but in the case where you asked, where if a position's not filled and they don't fill it, then it would revert. Now, you'll see in the budget, in the line item, we do account for that in some departments, where you see salary savings and all, because there's
Right.
turnover and all. So we incorporate some of that into the budget, but other times.
And leave it with,
No, if at the end of the fiscal year, for instance, if you're a department and you haven't spent all your, it will revert to general fund, and then your new budget is the budget you have before you.
reallocates that.
Yeah.
If, yeah.
Right.
So what if, say, in the capital improvements, what if money isn't used? How does that?
Capital
In the
improvements
capital
does
fund.
not have an end date. So if you've got an appropriation for some project, now, it would not revert. It just stays into that capital fund.
Right.
Now, hopefully you review that, particularly with the ward accounts, you review that over time to say, hey, there's some stagnant money there, and you want to get it to something that can be spent more immediately. You want to do that, but otherwise, it will stay appropriated to the fund in which it's been
So
originally
We
appropriated.
can accumulate as much as we want in our word capital?
Not exactly. With all our capital needs, you would hope that doesn't occur,
Right.
but,
It does.
yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Hubbard, you're next.
Thank you for a thorough presentation. I just have one brief question. I guess it'll come out later on, but will we see some detailed information on which particular departments didn't spend all of their money and how that money was allocated?
Yeah, that actually comes out with the annual reports the controller's office does each year, and you'll get that.
Okay, so during this process, like when we're determining what amount a department may need or may not need, will we see
Okay.
what they haven't used?
Well, you're in the current year, so you're not gonna have the final numbers for this year in which you're in. But in these documents, you do see how much they spent in the prior year, actually prior 2 years, you'll see that.
Okay.
So when you're looking through and you look at a line item and say, hey, they spent this much, and if you look at this year's budget and you say, hey, it's up or down or something like that, that's a fair question. Say, hey, if it's up a significant amount, you can ask that department, why are they up that amount? Or if it's less, why is it? They may have changed something during the year or something happened, and those are fair questions. But you do have actual expenditures in those budget books.
Thank you very much. And Alderwoman Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, that was excellent. The treasurer's input of 10 million, that's just a one-shot deal?
That's, unless some other arrangement occurs, but that was
Okay.
a result of that one
And where
ordinance.
10 million, well, I guess my question is where that 10 million came from, since it's being allocated to the city now. Some of that, wherever that came from, should still be coming to us, is that? am I
Well,
getting that right?
here's-
Not that it's gonna be 10 million every year,
No,
I get that.
you get a normal allocation from the parking meter.
Right.
That was that 60-40 split that was always
Right,
there. And so
right.
we always had that in revenue.
Yes,
But if you recall last year when we went through the budget process, and when they went through their parking meter division process, there were a couple additional provisions in there. One of them was $10 million for the fund balance reserve, specifically for, that was included in the ordinance.
right.
I believe it was the parking meter division
Yes, it
appropriation. So that went directly to the fund balance, right? And so then in addition to that, you had an additional, remember, I think it was last year where there was that issue about the NSOs, and we wanted to
Right.
find funds for them. And then I think there was also another $250,000 for tow trucks. That was $1 million, over and above the regular amount. Again, specified in ordinance for a specific purpose, so that came to general revenue.
Right.
So that was included in that time. But so in terms of going forward, the only regular funds I've got is the regular 64. So unless there's another
Okay.
accommodation or something, that's it.
Okay, that's good. And then, now, with the police department, where they say we're 130 short,
Yeah.
the money for those officers is already allocated. So it stays there, so if 130
Yes. What,
super people show up tomorrow, we can hire them.
yes, they should be able to hire. Now, what we're seeing is they'll be underspending their salaries, but you're overspending significantly in your overtime.
Overtime,
So
exactly.
you're seeing that occur, and that's been occurring for a while now, but that's how it generally
That's what
works.
I was wondering. But basically, the money is allocated for those folks,
Yes,
those bodies?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all, thanks.
All right, Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Paul.
sure.
Along the same lines of the from the parking division funds, that money that was allocated to the NSOs last year, that was specifically from the parking fund
Yes.
last year? And is that is fully funding the NSOs this year? Is that coming from the parking fund this year, or is that built into the budget?
The full funding for the NSLs is in this year's budget. I did not assume any additional money from parking. So the parking right now just has its normal, whatever it would be, I think it was like 1/7 or something like that. It's normal 60-40 split.
Okay, and wasn't that adjusted last year, that split? Or was that just split adjusted just for that last year?
It was, the split wasn't changed. It was, here's your split, but in addition to this,
Right.
we're gonna give you these additional
It was
funds.
some reserve money that was
Right.
being kept that was wrestled away.
Correct.
Okay.
For lack of a better term.
I have a couple of other questions about going through this presentation.
Okay.
Just generally, the use tax is going up somewhat significantly. You mentioned that several times.
Yep.
What is driving that? The use tax is a sales tax on construction items and things of that nature. Is that
Well,
right?
actually, I think
Or for
what,
items used in manufacturing, I should say. So what's driving that increase?
I think actually, and you're right, originally it mostly was paid by businesses. I think what we're seeing now is with Amazon starting to collect and some other online sales collect, you're beginning to see the benefit of getting those kind of payments contributed. Because Amazon started collecting a couple of years ago. And and again, without seeing in particular numbers, I would say that's probably worth by itself a couple $1 million. So typically, as I mentioned, the sales tax has not been strong for us historically because we're not strong in retail from the city. But what the use tax has done for us is now it created a mechanism for us collecting retail where we didn't collect before. And I'm hoping that what we're seeing is an expansion of the base of the use tax because of it. Because one thing that always worries me about the use tax, and this goes back to the recession before, is we saw a drop of something like 18% in 1 year on the use tax. Similarly, because it was paid by businesses. And who retrenches when there's a recession? It's the business spending. So I'm always a little leery about when I see use tax growth. Hopefully what we're seeing is with the expansion of the retail, we're seeing an expansion of the base so it wouldn't be so susceptible to that type of thing. You'll still see it trending, but not as severe. But I think it's retail, I think is what you're seeing.
So the online sales tax through Amazon is not described in this budget as sales tax, but rather as a use tax?
It comes in as use tax.
Comes in as a use tax.
Yes.
So when we've described use tax in the past in budget discussions, people have referred to it not as a sales tax. And that is precisely incorrect, I'd say. I mean, when we were discussing allocating use tax to various other things.
Yes.
In the years past.
Uh-huh.
It was always kind of described as, just a use tax, it's not a sales tax. So what I'm pointing out is that the use tax is a sales tax, and it.
Well, let me caution you on that one, and I'll tell you the difference. The use tax is basically collected on out-of-state sales, right? So and that's what we get. Now, Amazon has a facility in Granite City. So if you buy something through Amazon and it goes through that Granite City entity, that's classified as a use tax. However, it's also building or soon to open a new facility in St. Peter's. Now, under the state of Missouri law, if it goes through St. Peter's, guess what? No longer a use tax. It's a sales tax because it's within the state.
Okay.
So the reason why I think that's important is because for us, that makes a big difference in how the monies are allocated. And first of all, as a sales tax, we don't get that. It goes to St. Peter's.
Goes to the municipality.
So if you're buying from Amazon and it goes through Illinois, you'd rather buy it from there than you would from St. Peter's because the city's not going to benefit from that.
But as an Amazon customer, you can't necessarily.
You can't.
Expect that. But, so the point is that if it's coming out of Illinois, it's driving revenue for the city via use tax.
That's a use tax.
A use tax.
Right.
Okay, which is allocated very differently than if it was a sales tax, because we have all these different pots and use tax goes to
That's
certain
right.
things, et cetera.
That's right.
But there is some sales tax in that use tax pot. Could be for example, this Amazon example that you provided.
Well,
But it's still use tax.
yeah.
Sure, but it is you, as a customer from
Well-
Amazon, you pay a sales tax
Well,
and.
I think the more,
Sales tax, but I see your point. It's
the
not-
more appropriate way, it's a sales tax equivalent in a use tax form.
Great. But you're saying that the increase in the use tax is being driven to some significant part by this online sales and other things that are driving up.
I think that's true.
So it could be that the increase in use tax is susceptible to the movement of an Amazon facility, so we should be,
It is. It is. Now,
that's
when the
interesting, I didn't know that.
the state has various legislation in looking at how they treat, because of that recent Supreme Court case, the Wayfair case, but in terms of how the revenues are treated. One of the proposals was treat everything as a sales tax. The downside to that would be that, like you said, sales tax is allocated to different pieces. If they did that, you might see an increase in your overall take for sales taxes, but then the portion allocated to transit or the portion allocated to all these special funds that you don't have as discretion over goes up, but our discretionary funds go down. And so as a use tax, you get it, we allocate that by ordinance, and so, yeah, you gotta take a look at that in terms of.
But the movement of that facility from Granite City to St. Peter's could have $1 million or more decrease in our overall revenue for our city.
It could.
So that's a very significant thing we need to be keeping our
Yes,
eye on.
absolutely, absolutely.
What is driving the reduction in department fees and fines from 59 million to 58 million? Is that like building permits? What are those department fees and fines that we're looking at?
Building permits were pretty high this year. I don't know if we're gonna be as aggressive on permits and fees this year. This coming year, let me
What
see.
page are you on, Paul?
I am looking at slide 7. Is that the slide you're on?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So that reduction in department fees and fines?
Right, and then also we
'Cause we had
have,
such a large increase from 18 to 19,
Right.
and then it goes down.
right. We also this year had, for instance, the agreement with the U.S. Marshal to house prisoners. That was a significant increase this year. And then that ordinance, which allocated 70% to the special fund, 30% to the general fund, went into place, I think, after that point. So the division of those revenues occurred later in the fiscal year. So we'll see a decline on the general revenue side with an increase in the special revenue side for that one. So that, you'll see that in your revenue book as well.
But now that's broken out, so we
Yeah,
can see those
you
departments
can-
that are really performing.
You
well.
actually have, within your packet, a revenue book,
Yeah.
which has, so you can look under departmental receipts for each one and see what's the revenue estimates.
Okay. Then, then this Prop P on the same slide, or no, actually, I guess it's on the, where you have the Prop P, oh, excuse me, slide 10.
Yes.
You mentioned these 13.9 million for the police department plus a $0.8 million balance.
Mhm.
Is that 800,000 balance coming from the general fund to supplement this?
No,
I was
no.
confused by where these are. funds are-
Within the fund itself.
So the 13.9 million, and so the 0.8 million is from last year's?
Yes.
Is a fund forward?
Yes.
Okay. It wasn't clear to me at that point. The transportation funding that's being allocated, or that's being sort of accumulated, are we doing anything with that money? It seems like it would be around $30 million at this point, since we're borrowing money, $56 million, and we've got $30 million sitting in a pot, and we're paying 3%. You know, are we bonding that out to others? Are we using that as a revenue generator for ourselves? I know
No.
St. Louis County has been accumulating money since the passage of Prop A in 2010, and they recently bonded that out to generate some money for St. Louis County. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's actually what Beverly was referencing when you were talking about the trans.
Sure.
You notice how when the trans borrowing went up, and now this year it's going down?
Mhm.
One of the things she mentioned was the fact that our general fund balance is up.
Mhm.
So when you, and the other thing is that you've got some of these special funds which have a balance in them.
Sure.
And again, it's not, you're not taking money from the fund, you're basically, it's a pool of funds that are available. So when you're trying to manage cash flow through the year, you say, hey, we're sitting on something like $18 million in the transit fund, which isn't being spent right now. So do you need to borrow as much on your trans for cash flow purposes? That's why that's another reason why you're seeing that go down, is because of those type of funds.
So we can borrow money intergovernmentally without having to say, we need to borrow, we need to sell about $56 million of bonds just to make it through the year when we've got $36 million sitting over here in a transit fund.
They're taking that into account. Basically, they're saying, what the trans, and Beverly, you can jump in anytime I step on your toes. But what that's doing is basically, you're looking at your cash flow projections throughout the year. And what you're saying is, we need to cover all our bills for a certain amount of time. Well, where in cash, forget about where the funding source is, where in cash do we have that? And if you don't have enough cash, then you borrow from the trans to do that. But if you've got cash sitting in an account, regardless of where it is, because the accounting will take care of itself, you use that cash to pay the bills. And so what this is doing, as Beverly mentioned, is that your general fund balance is up a bit. You've got some balance here, so you don't have to borrow as much to cover the cash flow, for cash flow purposes.
Got it. That's good to hear. I just hated to think that we had $30 million sitting in an account and then we're borrowing money just to make it to the end of the year. The 911 enhancements, I'm sorry, if we're gonna go through these in detail later, the PSAP, but that's not something I'm familiar with, and we have a lot of problems with 911. Should I save those questions for another hearing?
Yeah, this
Okay.
is the overview.
Got it. And last question is regarding the building demolition, fully allocated, plus an additional. When you say that's fully allocated, I know what the full allocations for the affordable housing fund and other things are, but I wasn't aware of a full,
Yeah.
what is a fully funded demolition? And what makes it fully funded? In other words, what is prescribing
Okay.
that fund to begin with?
Okay. The use tax fund has by formula, the ordinance, sets aside, allocates $3 million. That's
For demolition?
that's for just for demolition.
But it's not a percentage, it's an actual.
No, it's an actual dollar amount. And so when we say full allocation, that means we're allocating the full $3 million, and over above that, we're giving $825,000. And then if you're interested in building demolition, it also receives another now this as a percentage, 17.3% of the use tax on Prop P, which is another $700,000. So if you add up those two different funds, you're over, what, $4.5 million or so.
So, and historically, we haven't allocated that much money to building demolition, so this is a huge surge in building demolition funds for the
Yes.
city of St. Louis?
Right. Well, historically, as you know, particularly with the affordable housing as well as building demo, simply because of our struggling balance, we would reallocate different funds. So this would be like the second year we've increased both of those.
And I haven't gone through all of these books yet,
Why not?
You haven't?
but,
I've been through mine 3 times.
well, I guess I have a little slight,
You have another job.
kid. He's like but anyway, but looking at those types of things over time, is that very clear? Is there clear line items to say, where the building
Yeah,
demolition fund?
sure.
Not just, I mean, it's kind of hard to see.
Right.
The demolition, you've got like human services, 4.4 million here, human services, 1.3 million. Where's the total? for the-
There's a number of things, and just for anyone who's just going through these books, most of the time you're going to be referencing this line item detail book.
One on
Now,
top.
okay, just to help you go through some of these, right up front, before you even get to the detail of the department, there's summaries. And the summaries are by fund and department and by department and funds. If you want to know how much is police, there's a summary, you can just look up police. Or if you want to know how much is the use tax, there's a summary for just use tax. So for instance, if you want to talk about the use tax fund, the use tax fund totals, it's a fund 1110, and you can see some historical numbers there. And what you see by department, what you see with those department numbers, each one of those is in detail behind it. So within the book, you'll have a budget that matches that. Now, to answer your question, historically, you will always have 2 years of expenditures, current year budget, and the proposed next year's budget, as well as the request. If there's anything anyone else wants in terms of longer-term historical information, we can always provide that, and we can get you for you.
All right, Alderman Mohammed, have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had an emergency, I had to step out, so I would like for you to go over the entire PowerPoint.
We'll arrange for private tutoring. We have the comptroller and mayor waiting, so
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
There
It
you go.
seems standard to me.
all right, Alderman Oldenburg is not present. Alderman Boyd is not present currently. Alderman Clark Hubbard, any other questions?
I just want to apologize for my tardiness. I was down the street serving in jury duty, and they kicked me out.
Well, good.
So I ran down here because this is my first experience with this, and I think it's important for me to be here. And I like the questions that were asked. Of course, I missed more than half the presentation, so if I have any questions, thank you for letting me know that I can reference the book. And then if I have any other questions,
Just give us a call. Yeah, give me a call.
Yeah.
That's fine.
thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Alderman. I have no questions, Mr. Payne. With that, we can excuse you and move on to the next round.
Thank you, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, and we're going for double jeopardy next.
Thank you.
All right, anybody need to stretch your legs for the comptroller gets here?
No copy.
Don't let anybody leave.
Don't leave.
We leave and we don't come back.
Usually we scoot around so you can get back. That way she can use the desk. It's the first short on seats today. Thank you.
What are we doing? Here's a seat.
Yeah, yeah,
Where'd boy go?
No, she
She had to leave. Here's a seat. I said she had to go in.
Oh, okay. Well, she took her stuff.
Yeah.
Right, no, she left.
Okay.
Come on,
So we're only 47 minutes behind schedule. so-
Uh-huh.
Actually, that's pretty good.
It's 1:30. Yeah, she's supposed to be here. She's supposed to be speaking at 1:30. It's 2:18, so it's 30.
Controller is supposed to be here at 1:30. It's already on 2:20.
We got
The coffee is really cold. It's like cold though.
Maybe supplement it with some decaf. Favorite spot.
Get you back in the All right. All right, everyone, quick, try and find a seat if possible, get organized here.
Hi.
Try and move along, hello? All right, get the door shut.
2 years ago.
Comptroller Green, thank you for your patience. We had a lot of questions of Mr. Payne, so it took a little while longer.
$1 billion.
Yes.
That's the last time I checked, so
He was quite
I
thorough.
never used to have.
We're going to come to order, please.
Yeah, there you go, there you go. Rub it here. Okay.
Madam Comptroller, at your leisure.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Honorable Ways and Means Committee members. Thank you for inviting us this afternoon to give you a little bit snippet of the budget of the comptroller. Before I begin, I want you to know that we have many members of our staff here to answer questions, and that I'm going to turn it over to Bev, which is the Deputy Comptroller, to give you just a little synopsis of what our budget is for the fiscal year 2020.
All right, thank you, Beverly, your show.
Once again, I'm Bev Fitzsimmons, Deputy Comptroller. If you look at our budget, the majority of it, like most budgets, are personnel driven. But we also have within our budget that makes up the $6 million that's entailed. It also is the telecommunications for the city. And it also is the insurance that the city has to pay, outside insurance. We're self-insured, but we still pay outside insurance because of bond indentures and things like that. So when you're looking at it, it's not like we're really spending $6 million. It is a citywide function on many areas there. A comparison of the general fund money for the comptroller's office is approximately that we did go up about $275,000 this year. About $140,000 of that is personnel driven. We have decided that we would like to beef up our internal audit section a little bit better. We used to have a pretty large section. We cut it back and realized that we needed to start looking at that again. And we hired a new audit manager, Jason Fletcher.
Step on in, Jason.
Is our new audit manager, and he has a vision that we're trying to work on, and he has asked for us to add 2 auditor 3s to his staff so that he can get back into the level of accounting that he feels is adequate for this office to do for the city. Okay, so that's pretty much what the
And Jason's been with us for a
About a
year.
11 months, yeah, about a year.
Almost a year, from the State of Missouri Department of Revenue.
Yeah, fuel compliance bureau.
CPA,
Yep.
seasoned, smart, knows what he's talking about.
She may be overselling you, no. I'm joking.
Are there any handouts you have there for the committee?
No, I
Okay,
don't,
all right,
I'm
thank
just
you.
talking off.
All right, thank you.
What page are we
Oh.
on?
So basically, to sum up what Bev is saying, is that our budget only went up about 4% overall, just a tad bit over 4%. And like she said, it was personnel driven, and there's a couple of auditors that switched from, went to auditor 3s. And then there's a couple of other mentions that we can tell you is that, we're still under 90, total of 96 employees?
Right.
So we're still under 100 employees, and we've been under 100 employees since I've been in office. We just keep chopping away at the number. And we are becoming, or continuing to be very efficient in the comptroller's office with the number of audits that we do and with the compliance work that we do. And, you've heard about the couple of bond issues that we are underway. We're going to have a transportation committee meeting tomorrow regarding the airport's bond issue. And I speak about it because you guys probably read about it in the news, and maybe you saw the controversy, what have you, maybe not. But you need to understand that the agreements that the airport enters into with the airlines, the MOU, those agreements are made years in advance. So in 2015, and this is kind of off the script, but it's still pertinent to the comptroller's office, isn't that right, Tom? Shepherd? Okay, just in case you didn't know. Anyway, airport commissioners approved the agreement, the 5-year agreement that was agreed to by the airlines and the airport in 2016, which included bond issues that we would be entering into in the future. And one of them happened to be the current one that the Transportation Committee will hear on tomorrow, which is what you've been hearing. The city's going to save $20 million. That's the one I'm talking about that was approved, 4 years ago? So I'm just putting it out there. It's not like a secret. And that all the people who were airport commissioners at the time, which included myself and the now Mayor Cruzen, who was an airport commissioner at the time, as well as the president of the board, who's also airport commissioner now and was at the time. So we were all party to approving those kind of agreements. And now as we move forward into the time where the transaction should actually happen, it's time to honor them. Otherwise, we would be not honoring the contracts that we made with the airlines, and we don't want to be in default. And so that's why. I just wanted to say that, because that's a side, because you may have had that as a question.
So also included in our budget is the municipal garage is under the comptroller's realm, and also records retention. So, and those are pretty flat. I mean, we're trying to buy a few more scanners in one, and it kind of evens itself out. There's other departments of the city, as she mentioned, finance and development, which Jim heads up, which does all our outside financing things. We are the redevelopment section. All the TIFs that are passed, all the special deals, all have to be handled by our redevelopment section. So that's a portion of it. We have our federal grant section, our accounts payable section, our financial reporting sections are just a few to mention.
And you
on
mentioned the
that.
Gateway.
And the Gateway Transportation Center is also run by the Comptroller's Office, and that is under the realm of the Comptroller's Office also.
So are there any questions?
Well, we'll go through, we'll start with Alderwoman Davis. You have any questions of the Comptroller's Office?
I just want to add, for those that are not familiar, the Comptroller's Office also collects all funds that are under an ordinance to be collected. Monitor everything for us. So when we talk about special business districts and a number of other things, all money, and that's something most of us don't even pay attention to. And so I think it's important that people understand that.
Thank you.
I also wanted to share with that as well. When we talk about bonding, when we talk about investments, at the end of the day, even though we have one other arm that does some investment, at the end of the day, it still has to come back through the Comptroller's Office. So all financing, at the end of the day, comes through the Comptroller's Office.
Anything else?
I'm done.
Okay, all right, thank you, Madam Vice. All right, Alderman Vaccaro, you're up.
I only have like 3 hours of questions.
No, okay.
Go right ahead.
I have no questions.
No questions, all right, thank you, sir. Alderwoman Howard,
No questions.
thank you there. And Alderwoman Hubbard,
No questions at this time.
thank you. Alderwoman Murphy,
Just one, what did you say your budget increased, how much? I missed that at the beginning.
4%.
Right, at 4%.
up a quarter.
Thank you. That's all.
All right, okay. Alderwoman Spencer,
I have no questions other than just, are we gonna go through this budget, their budget in detail later, or
It's up to you
this is
guys.
just the overview, or?
No, this is.
no, this
This is it.
is your meeting with her.
We don't never get into those.
We're always happy to answer questions later, but.
Yeah, we'll answer any question you have.
Yeah,
Whenever.
basically,
I'll defer to.
So I'm just trying to familiarize myself with the process. This is my first time on Ways and Means, so it's kind of a crash course, but
Sure.
as we go through this and dissect it, will they still be able to come before us and ask questions, or who will we
Yeah.
inquire to?
Before we approve it, we can call them in, yes.
So here's the deal. Mr. Chairman and all you guys and honorables, we're here, I brought the whole staff, and we can answer any of your questions. You know, and with all due respect, I should say, you guys are new, and you guys are on a short time. You only got less than 60 days now. It's about 45 days, okay? And you have less than that because the books have to be printed and stuff. And you know that if you're not done in timely manner, what the budget director gave to you becomes the budget.
Sure.
So just relax. If you got questions, ask us now. We're here. We're all here. And what happens is, if we don't have the answer, then we send it to you, you know, so that you get it. So it's as to not to waste your time to wait for later. Because some of these, you know, it's getting ready to be summer. We got Memorial Day coming up. You know what I'm saying? Y'all got problems if you don't ask questions now, is what I'm trying to say.
Joe,
So
can
get to
I
it.
add something?
Thank you. I understand that process. I haven't been on Ways and Means, but I understand that process. And I actually have a problem with it because it puts us up under the thumb if we don't really get things done timely, then it reverts back to room 200, basically pushing. We probably need to change the charter regarding that because it's a crash course that, I mean, we've been elected to divvy things up and understand what's really going on. But if I have questions at a later time, thank you for being able to answer some questions.
You are so welcome.
So, and given that knowledge, and I appreciate that overview here, I'm looking at page 51, 52, and 50, or pages 51 and 52 of the line item detail, which describes the comptroller's budget. Is that what I should be looking at to
Yes.
determine any questions I have for you? I guess the first, we have a column here of requests for fiscal year 20, and then the budget, which is different. Are there, you know, one thing that's sticks out to me is you requested 450,000 for your health insurance, but we're only allocating 422. So what does that mean for you? Does that mean like 4 employees don't get health insurance or?
No, actually, when you're actually, or do you want to answer that?
I can address that.
Okay.
Particularly when you get to personal services, when we issue the budget allocations, they come out in January, we're estimating what health insurance premium is and the life insurance premium and all, because you don't know what the final number is. But by the time, and the pension contribution, but by the time we get to end of March or so, we will know exactly what those are. So you will see in everybody's budget some changes that are uniform. So mostly with fringes, budget division does, and it'll be automatic. It will say, hey, we know what the rate is, and we'll do it.
So, Madam Comptroller, the work your office does for our city is very important to the financial health of our city. And what I want to understand is if the budget for your office allows you as comptroller to perform the duties that you need for our city.
That's a good question. And in the environment that we're in, I can say that we have always a need, for more funding. That's citywide. We could always use more money, but what we have said is that we can work smarter and harder with less. And that's what we have been doing for years. We work harder, we work smarter, and we try to come within the guidelines of the budget, because the number one thing is to balance, to issue a balanced budget. That's the law, that's a mandate. And as we would put in our request, as you pointed out, the budget director has to take into account the request for all departments and then immediately streamline. And we are no exception. The comptroller's office does not get a break. All offices get cut. And of course, then all the phone calls go over to Paul. And of course, we just work as hard as we can to get what we believe that we need. And so we believe that as we go into the 2020 budget, that we will be able to, continue to do our jobs with this particular budget.
So that's the main question I have. What might be missing from the budget for your office? And it sounds like, while it may not be 100% ideal given the constraints of our city budget, this is in line with what you need to operate.
For now, of course, we could use more, and I want to keep that on the table. We could use more. Our budget especially, as you say, we work very hard. We're probably the hardest working department in the city government. And we could always use more. So if there is any indication that you're going to be negotiating for more, we should be at the top of that list.
That's
Can
all.
I add
That's-
just because I sat on this since day one, what really is going to become the task? The heads of all these departments are going to come in and like she's happy with her budget. Forestry might come in and say, well, if you want 4 grass cuttings, you got to find the money.
Right.
So what we have to do then is take money from the comptroller or whoever.
She's saying
No.
I understand, but we have to take money, but what we're going to be tasked with at the end of this is take money from whether it's the comptroller or whatever department. We can take money from whatever and suggest it goes somewhere else. They don't have to put it where we want it. They just can't put it back where we take it from.
And I
I
appreciate
didn't know
that.
if you knew that.
And I understand that, which is why I wanted the comptroller, she had something that was missing, to identify it now, to let us know in a general sense how this budget would serve her office and the role that she plays in our city.
Do you have enough bullets in your gun is what she's asking.
And she said yes,
Right.
yes.
She
So
does.
we're happy to hear that. That's all the
She
question.
always greases that gun.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Spencer. And next on the list is Alderman Muhammad. Any questions of Madam Comptroller?
No, I think you do a fantastic job, Madam Comptroller. I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Alderman Burton, while you're absent, will Alderman Clark Hubbard.
No question.
Thank you.
I have one I want to go back.
Alderman Howard has a question for you. Go ahead, please.
And I don't know if this is for you or for Mr. Payne, but we were talking about the 9/11 system costs. And he had mentioned that we were doing the PSP. PSAP, okay. And there was the request of 744, but we were only allocated 475 for that. So
And Jim, you can correct me if I
Can
say anything
somebody
wrong, but
explain why, if we're going to
Right.
improve our 9/11 system, where's that?
Yeah, why'd you cut us?
that
Why'd
was-
you keep them the
Well,
same?
the funding is an enhancement of the current 911 system. Originally, that was going to be provided for under the economic development sales tax as a purchase of equipment. Where it turned out, and Jimmy, again, correct me if I'm wrong, it ended up being more provided through the cloud. So
Through the what?
through the cloud. It was
Oh.
less purchase of equipment as
I got
anticipated, more payment on this communications line. So you're gonna see it in two places. You're gonna see it under the general fund here, and then you will also see it under Fund 1124, which is also in the, I believe in the comptroller's office budget, which is the enhanced version of the 911 system.
Okay. I just was curious, because we brought that up when you did your presentation, and I thought, oh, okay.
All right.
All right, that's all I
Okay,
have.
thank you, Alderman Howard. I have no questions. I've been over all out of this with Mr. Cavaglia, so I appreciate your time. If anyone has anything before we close, we can move on to the next presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Conduit for everything that's right. As long as they have the money to do all that.
I just was wondering.
I feel like we'd all like more money.
Okay. So there's got the mayor's on their way in.
What page does the mayor's thing start on, so I don't have to keep looking?
Paul, you have to know what page.
120. Yeah, it's hot in here. Must be the hot air.
Mayor's
Let's
office.
put Todd right here.
120?
At 120, yeah.
No, I don't.
They're not where like you think they
All
are.
right, everybody can find a seat if you can. Keep going here.
That's not right.
128.
Circuit, mayor's office.
You got what?
I mean,
Do you? It's not the same as last year.
Yeah, mayor's office. Page three.
On that.
Same as last year.
It's right up
Go
front.
back to Park. Okay.
Ma'am?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would you, everyone knows the players, Mr. Conway and Mr. Walterman are present in the room.
They
Very much. And we'll let you start at your leisure.
Thank you. Thank you all for letting us come here and visit with you a little bit about the mayor's office budget. I believe you've already had a long meeting, right? Yeah. Well, I'm going to let Steve, Chief of Staff Steve Conway, talk about the details, and I'm here to answer any questions.
All right, well, our budget is in essence the same as the past year. I know that when you look at personal services, it looks like there's a jump. But if you go back to account number, fund number 116 in the mayor's office, the year before we had funded Patrick Brown, who had done the resiliency work, and Christina Garmindia. We were able to secure grants to pay their salary. The work that Patrick Brown and Christina have done is very important. We plan to replace them, but I don't have grant money to do that. So that $158,000 that we managed to negotiate with funders the year before is not available. For this year, we do have $76,000 in some funding to replace the position for children and family and youth services, and we plan to fill that sometime in the next 45 or 50 days. So that would be the only difference in our budget from last year to this year. We are actually going to have tentatively one less staff person than we did the year before. And we're open to any questions.
All right, we'll open up to Alderwoman Davis.
I'm glad to hear that you are going to fund that position. One of the things that we've been talking about in the community at large is how we need to connect the dots to make sure that we have intensive wraparound care for families, which will reduce crime and keep people with a better quality of life. And so having someone in that position to help the at-large community do that, I think is great.
Well, not only that, but part of the requirement of receiving the funding is to make it a cabinet-level position so that it has the imprimatur to bring these issues to the forefront of the aldermen and the rest of the staff.
Okay, we got problems right now, Mr. Hughes?
No,
Looking for a
I'm
page?
next anyways.
Okay, all right, well, we
See,
keep it
where
down till
does
we
it
get to
show
you.
up in the book? We're just trying to find it.
Page 5.
Which
In
one?
the position.
It's not a new position. We had a fellow previously named Carl Filler, but it isn't the exact same description of the job. And the United Way and the Mental Health Board.
So what would that position be? I think we just want to find. That position would be, you said child,
Children, family, and
Youth
children
service.
and youth services.
so that would do what?
That will coordinate, I mean, numerous programs that we actually have that impact the lives. It will work to implement the equity indicators as they impact the vast majority. Most of the equity indicators, if you look at that report, about 40 or 45% of the indicators that we're measuring impact youth. So we will agree to make it a cabinet level position.
Okay. That's
There's a
fine.
tremendous amount of coordination too. You know, there are a lot of people in our city who are not-for-profits and that sort of thing in the school district and all of these
Absolutely.
folks that are working in
All
this
these little fiefdom
arena.
islands.
But, you know, it really does require coordination and someone to speak on behalf of the city and the mayor's office and,
Sorry, I think that-
Alderman Davis, were you finished with your questions before Alderman Carl trying to take over?
The mayor just expounded on what I was trying to say. We do have the resources to make change in our city. And on a small level, we do it every day in certain areas, but that's because we choose to work with any and everybody. And no matter how small an entity is or how large, there's a role to be played. A pastor called me this morning that the two gentlemen that just got killed, their cousins, I think last night or the night before. We have too many churches, we have too many nonprofits, we have too many boys and girls clubs, we have too many juvenile justice programs, we have too many everything. But I appreciate your thought process. Let's coordinate, connect the dots, and get the job done.
Okay, will that be all? Okay. Alderman Carl, Mr. Usurp, you can take over.
Well, So are we doing questions and comments?
Yeah.
or-
Just me.
No, I have no question or comment.
All right, well, thank you very much then, sir. We'll move on to Alderwoman Howard.
I have no questions.
All right, thank you. Alderwoman Hubbard.
I just have one quick question. Which staff person is responsible for ordering the cameras? Because I've been trying to coordinate that effort. I have money sitting there waiting to be spent to make my neighborhood safer. Which one of these positions does that? Are we still funding that position? Because I need cameras like yesterday.
well, there's no one
Yes.
who's
License
really
plate
in the
readers,
mayor's
all of that.
office who orders
Complete.
cameras, but there's two ways that cameras get installed. One is through the Board of Public Service, if you're funding it with Ward Capital. And the other is through usually or often private, maybe a neighborhood group or a SBD or that kind of thing, and if you're gonna go about it in that way.
I'm definitely trying to fund it through Ward Capital. I've spoken with the liaison at BPS, and he told me that everything was being put on hold because someone in the mayor's office who orders said, I don't know if you all are trying to do a revamp of ordering all cameras, a new contract or whatever. I just know
Yeah.
I'm ready to spend money on cameras.
All right, well, what we will do is get with Rich Bradley then
Okay.
and figure this out. So I think what you're referring to is Robert Gaskell Clemens in my
Yeah,
office
yeah,
is the
that was
Chief
his name.
Technology Officer. And he's made a lot of progress on things, and we're wanting to make sure that the new cameras that are ordered are compatible, that we get a price for, one price for them, but, so there's that is going on, and that there's an RFP out for that. That doesn't mean we're gonna stop doing everything though, and that's been a misunderstanding. And, I don't know who said what to who about that, but Robert's very clear that, you know, the world cannot stop while we get a better price or maybe get a newer model. These cameras are like our phones. You know, mine's already old and I haven't even had it that long. So anyway, so if you've got money in your board capital budget and you know where you need them to go and all that, then we'll get to work on it.
We do, we've been working on it. I've just been on hold for like 6 or 7 months, so I want to get it done. Thank you. No,
That must be extremely frustrating.
It is, it is.
I was told the same thing.
Yes.
All right, Alderwoman Murphy, you're up next.
No, Alderwoman Howard.
Oh,
No, I already went.
Oh, you went, I am next.
I got a list
Thank
here.
you. Oh, thank
It's
you,
alphabetical
thank
by
you.
height.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. No, everything's fine. So my understanding is that the
Please
NISs are
stand.
fully funded this year, because that's what our constituents are concerned about when they heard the budget was out. And then my other bone of contention is that he took mine. But
I was
that's a
gonna
whole
say, I
nother
bet
ballgame.
I know what you're mad about, Alderwoman
But
Murphy.
that's okay.
He took what?
He took my NIS.
Oh.
Kicked him upstairs. It was excellent.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a whole.
Andrew Hernandez
Yeah.
is coming into the mayor's, he started yesterday in the mayor's office to help with all the calls and that sort of thing that we get there, so.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for being here today. It looks like most of your budget is just personnel. Your office, you know, I mean, is personnel change, but there's a lot of changes in what appears to be salaries. Is my understanding, I guess this is my first time kind of understanding the mayor's office budget in detail. Is that the way I understand these changes in numbers?
Ask, what are you speaking of here? Like,
I guess my question is just, I mean, it looks like there's some kind of flipping around and changes in salaries and the staff, and the mayor's office staff. Am I reading this correctly?
Give me one of the lines.
yeah,
Okay, the chief of staff,
That's me.
that would be you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a significant raise there.
Right, that's the amount the old fellow got, and that's the amount that the new
new
chief of
fellow
staff.
got.
Okay,
I had an extra degree.
got it.
Okay.
Part of this is also, if I could just interject here, the titles that are assigned by personnel do not, I mean, you can only have a title that's assigned by personnel, as you probably know, and they don't always align with exactly what the person does. Chief of staff does, but when you see all these special assistants to the mayor and that sort of thing.
I was just talking to some of the other budget directors, or excuse me, the other some of the department heads who were describing the sort of path to giving their employees raises, and it seems complicated and cumbersome to give employees for the city raises, and in some, I guess, in some instances, in this instance, it would not be difficult to do, and I'm just hopeful that we can maybe talk about that process to make sure that our employees are well compensated and appreciated for the jobs they do in other departments.
Well, if I could just say for a minute, I wish that we could pay all of our employees more, because I think that they're not all well compensated, and they're probably not all paid what they're worth. That being said, you know, it's all budget considerations, so.
And that's one of the difficult things that we're having, in hiring in the parks, the recreation, or you all know Jay and Patrick. You know, the grass is pretty green outside right now, not because it's growing tall, because the other people, the private businesses are paying, and it is getting very difficult. And we have a cumbersome civil service process that is not responsive to economic conditions. It's a 3 to 4 month process on anything.
I would agree. That's all the questions I had.
All right, thank you very much, Alderwoman. Alderman Muhammad.
Yes, would you be willing to fire Steve and hire me? Don't answer. No questions, Mr. Chairman.
How about
Need an
that
extra
recall,
degree.
Alderman? Is this some kind of deal we're gonna make right here?
Oh, an old Virgil lawyer, not good.
Mr. Smarty Pants.
Alderman Clark Hubbard?
No question.
No
Thank
questions, do you? All
I
right.
do have a
I
follow-up.
like that.
Okay.
Joe, I have a follow-up.
Okay, Alderman Vaccaro would like to jump
No, I
back in the
do.
pool.
No, because the cameras that you brought up, so 3 years ago, we went through the whole process, funded the cameras for Tilly's Park, went through the whole process, it was approved, we went through everything, and I was told exactly the same thing. In other words, it's funded, approved, sitting there, and they said the mayor, put a hold
3 years
on it.
ago, I wasn't there.
No. No.
That was
this-
that other mayor.
Right, 3 years ago, when we started this to put cameras in Tilly's Park, I called up there because people were saying, where are these cameras at? And they said Mayor Cruz, the mayor now, put a stop work order on all the cameras. So what you're saying is the same answer I got from the Board of Public Service, because we've been 3
So
years
are
in
you
that
still
process.
waiting for your cameras in Tilly's Park?
Yes,
And you funded them through Ward Capital?
a long time ago. And I did talk to Todd about that again today, and I was told exactly that.
Todd told you we had a hold on cameras?
No,
We,
Board
Joe
of
and I
Public
just talked this
Service
morning.
Bye, Todd.
told me, the Board of Public Service told me that the mayor's office puts a stop work order, exactly the same way.
So if I could, you mentioned that Robert had this
Same thing
RFP
happens
out.
to us.
They have all
They
the
say the
submittals now, they're
alderman
ready to
said,
proceed.
and the alderman
With,
didn't
they
say.
need one more meeting to award it to the camera guy. That whole long process is over.
Well, where are we at? Well, I'll argue with you later about
Okay,
that, but.
it sounds like a
but I
minor
got-
for-
I
Has
got the
anybody
same-
ever said, the
I got the
alderman
same
said
exact
about
thing.
you? I've had that happen.
Yeah, you know, that's quite frustrating to me, quite frankly, because 2 years ago, we didn't have Robert. Robert's only been there a year.
even here.
He wasn't even
No,
here,
no,
so I don't know how
okay.
that could have been the
No,
case.
So the cameras were, and we could argue later, but the cameras
Oh, it's
have
not.
been funded and put there. And I'm being told that you, this mayor, had a stop work order, and that's why we don't have the cameras. in
And
the
who
park.
told you that? Exactly who?
Board of Public Service.
There's a name?
Whoever my BPS guy,
Donald?
I guess that's who that
I
is.
don't know.
Okay.
No, it's not Donald, I'm trying to think.
All right, so we obviously have to do a
Danny?
better job.
Danny
of-
is who my guy is, yeah.
We have to do a much better job at communicating on this. We cannot, we do want the latest and greatest cameras, and we do want the best price, and we do want them all to be compatible. But we cannot have everything stop while that happens.
I agree.
I would agree with that, but I was just
Digress.
commenting on what, you know, because I agree with that. I have the same answer.
Alderwoman Davis has raised her hand before you, Alderman Brown.
So I just want to comment a little bit on the cameras because I found that working with the real-time center is the most efficient way to get good information about cameras, educating the community about cameras, where is the most efficient place to put them, because most people don't understand, they just want it on their corner.
Right.
And so they use the crime stats to help you decide the location, and they also want them to be compatible with the system there. There's not much point in having them there if they're not compatible to the system. And because they buy more cameras than you probably would buy individually, it would be nice if we could connect this whole process so that we can get good prices.
So I did have to go through that process. I had to get, not only the parks, I had to get the police to approve the cameras. I had to go through this whole process. In other words, I couldn't just say, "Oh, put these cameras." I had to have the police approve them. It was a big meeting. It took 3 years. It's been 3 years to get these cameras. They had to come and do a study where the cameras were the best in the park and everything like that. So I did. We went through we followed the whole process through, and we're anxious to get the cameras.
You know, I'll personally talk with BPS about that. There's one other factor that we haven't talked about today. There's more to it than buying the cameras. The cameras have to have either fiber to connect back or
It's been a
But,
part
and
of
it did.
many of them in the
And we had,
old.
and we had the fiber and everything, that was part of the process. And it had the fiber.
That was the time.
Or you can
Alderwoman
use
Davis is
Spectrum or
next. Okay,
something.
we have some more questions coming. We'll start with Madam Vice. You had
All I want to say is hopefully somehow we can coordinate this system because, and I'm going to say this, I don't care about nobody's feelings getting hurt. But you know, sometimes when we bid things out, people give us different prices because they think that the city has money. And I can go out and get it bidded on my own, and I can get it for half of what the bid is for the city. But somehow we've got to get past that, and I don't know how we do that. And maybe it is that BPS is not the one that sends the bid out. Maybe your system, Judge, should send the bid out. We've got to change something, and that's all I want to see happen. We have very few dollars, and we need to be able to spend
We
them.
need to stretch them as much as we
Absolutely,
can. and- yes.
absolutely.
Okay.
I agree with that.
All right.
I'm done, sir.
Thank you. No, Alderman Muhammad, you had your hand up next, I
I
believe.
did. The chairwoman, the vice chairman just said exactly what I was going to suggest. Because even dealing with cameras too, I was told the same thing by BPS. There was a set in the mayor's office. However, my consistent calling and crying got the cameras installed. Anyway.
Persistent.
Persistence. But if, because like I said, we have to get approval from the traffic division, the police department, from BPS,
Do what you got.
all these different agencies. Would it not just be easier, and like you said, it'd be better if it connects to the real-time crime center, if we could just have everything approved under the Director of Public Safety's purview? Is that a policy that we can implement, this session in order to get the cameras installed?
You know, I think, if you're open, I think we ought to have maybe a meeting about this, because it depends on, when it feeds into the real-time crime center, then, is it public, is it available to the public? There's a lot of personnel time, et cetera, in answering sunshine requests and that sort of thing. There's a lot to this, and when you use ward capital money, I think legally, the city feels that then it has to go through BPS. But I think, it's kind of a confusing thing. We've recently been dealing, at least Alderwoman Middlebrook is not here, but we've been recently dealing with a situation there in the second ward, which just a lot of confusion about this, about which way to go and what money triggers what requirements, so.
And educating the public too on the cameras, because people have this misnomer of what a camera can achieve. And I think that's really important too. When you have true bedroom communities that are close-knit, have very little crime, we may not necessarily need to be putting a camera there. But we may need to be putting some other tools and educating people on how to report things if they see out of order and making calls, things like that. So I agree, conversation needs to be had.
All right, it sounds like.
And there's LPRs too, LPRs.
Like we're
come into
straying
this
away
also.
from the budget into an area that actually
Absolutely,
needs special
sir.
attention.
Personal.
Yes.
All right, so we'll take it. Alderman Hubbard, you have a question towards the budget?
One, I don't, but just one quick comment about the cameras. I just want to let everyone know that I've done my due diligence and spoke with the police department, and I mean, where they said where the cameras needed to go, but a big chunk of the money was being spent on fiber, because we have such aging infrastructure, and they would have to tap all the way down here to Soldiers Memorial for us to even get fiber in our neighborhood to have the cameras that'll, be comparable with the real-time crime center. I'm talking about license plates, readers, everything, and I was taking those cameras all the way to Old North. So it's an issue, and everybody has been being told the same thing. The money is there. I've been making money specifically for cameras, but I've been on hold for 6 or 7 months trying to spend it.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
unacceptable.
All right.
And I have a follow-up question regarding the budget in general. We're here, I suppose, to talk about the mayor's office, which is just one page of the budget. But in a general sense, the vast majority of the pages in this budget, the departments that the city operates, fall directly under the leadership of our mayor's office. And so given that the vast majority of this budget is directly under your purview and the purview of your staff, as we go through the rest of the budget, would somebody from your staff be available to answer questions about how we're reallocating or allocating what revenue we do have to the services that our city does provide all of our constituents?
Sure, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
That'd probably be
Do
a
what?
big guy.
Paul does that.
But
Do you, Alderwoman, do you have a specific question
guess-
you want to ask?
Well, as I was kind of looking through some of the different departments, you know, things that are getting cut from our building division and other direct city services that we rely on to serve our constituents and make sure that our communities are safe. I don't want to get into those details necessarily here today because we're talking about the mayor's office budget, but I do have some questions about why we would make certain cuts to certain departments and
Sure.
and other things,
Well, you know,
mowing and.
we never have enough money. I mean, I bet, I wasn't here when Paul gave his report, but, you know, we never have as much money as we want. And
Yeah.
that was something else?
I said we can never be too rich or too thin.
There you go. So we never have enough money, and so, you know, in this budget, I'm sure you've heard this from Paul, you know, we really are continuing to try to prioritize demolition for the worst first on demolition money. We're trying to put an additional $1 million into affordable housing. We're trying to make sure that we can fund summer jobs. This summer, we expect through STL Youth Jobs to be able to hire, STL Youth Jobs will hire almost 1,000 young people. We think that's, you know, an important aspect of it. We also think recreation, the expansion of recreation programs are important. We fully have funded ward capital, so I think it's $9.1 million in total. That's $325,000 per alderman, so that you can buy dumpsters and do sidewalks and pave streets. And I know you don't have enough money, but, you know, so that there's money available. So it's really just trying to do the most we can with the money that we have, just like at home. That's what we're all trying to do, right? So, yeah, and of course, the Board of Aldermen, or this committee rather, Ways and Means Committee, can recommend, you can make cuts, and you can recommend adds, and, you know, this is our best shot at it, but that's why we have these hearings, so.
All right, thank you very much. I believe we
Are we
are.
out of here?
We are.
Thank you all, I
No
really do
problem.
appreciate this.
Get the president in. Sue, sure, where's that? What do I have?
Everybody's gonna hear the same story.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor. Yours.
Yeah, I heard it, I'm mad too.
Well, we need to like.
You got all spiffy for this hearing, huh?
Tamika, I'm gonna tell you, I had.
Okay,
I don't know, it's not gonna be your first question, is
Get
it?
my
Yeah,
cameras.
cut the budget.
You said you've been doing this how long?
$325,000.
I think two dollars.
How many times have I stood
Is
this?
Louis coming, or are you?
He is not going
Okay,
to
all right.
represent the president
We'll
today.
call to order. Mr. Shepherd will be handling the presentation for the, are we good? Try and move along here. Mr. Shepherd, Tom Shepherd will be handling the presentation for the president's office, so Tom, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This year's budget for the Board of Aldermen has a few changes from last year, nothing too dramatic, I don't think. We changed some salaries. If you look on page two of the budget book, we made an adjustment. With just a little history going back, within the last 2 or 3 years, we have added and changed some positions at the Board of Aldermen. We recently added a legislative researcher position and a financial analyst position. For those of you who didn't know, those positions are relatively or recently new to the board. We used to have those positions, you know, back in the 80s or early 90s, but they've just been added back. And we've also just recently split the clerk legal counsel position. So after filling those positions, and during the process of filling one of the positions, we changed the salary that was appropriated in the budget for them last year for the chief automatic clerk. And this went through the personnel committee. That salary was adjusted from $75,000 to $90,000. The legislative researcher position, which we had filled, but currently is vacant, and we have applications in and we'll be hiring. We adjusted the description for that position and we reduced that salary from 49,000 to 30,000. And for the financial analyst position, we initially put that position up on the website to be filled. Didn't know exactly what we would get, who we would get, how qualified the person would be. But once the position was filled and the person that filled it, began to work and perform services for the Board of Aldermen. And, looking at their educational background and their work history and the impact they were having on the board, there was a meeting at the Personnel Committee meeting, which I believe the discussion was led by the Vice President of the board, Joe Rody, who's also in the financial industry. And it was recommended that a salary increase was made to that position to better reflect the education and work history of the person that impacted
That amount is?
that amount went from 70,000 to 106,575. And so, and currently, the Board of Aldermen of the branches of government in the major departments in government, like the Comptroller's office, the Mayor's office, we still have some of the lower paid people heading the department. A lot of these other departments, they're paying people 150,000, multiple people 150,000, 130,000. So we figured we wouldn't shortcut ourselves this year.
Let's keep the chatter down.
Yeah, and other than that, everything else is pretty much the same. We put 5,000 extra as compared to last year in materials and supplies. Maybe we'll be able to squeeze out some new chairs in the Kennedy room.
You'd think.
But I'll take any questions. Yeah.
I have to see my chiropractor after I sit in that chair.
All right,
I'll take any questions.
okay. Alderwoman Davis, you're up.
I don't have any questions.
All right. Thank you very much. Alderman Vaccaro.
No questions.
All right. Alderwoman Howard.
No questions.
Okay. Alderwoman Hubbard.
No question.
Okay. Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions now.
All right. Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I've ever been asked if I did have a question and I said no.
We haven't noticed.
So the budget is largely the same for the Board of Aldermen, with those few exceptions. And maybe this is a self-serving question, but has the alderman, when was the last time aldermen received an increase in salary?
That was probably about
10 years ago.
10 or 8
No,
years
because
ago.
I was the first one to get it
No,
after my election.
no, we did not get it. We did not get an increase.
You did.
No, it's been 25 to 30 years.
No.
No, there was
I was
one,
a-
it was based off of,
I was the first one to get
We
it.
voted on it.
No, you're talking about,
Wants to do that.
no,
no, but it was based off,
Okay.
it was based off of,
across the board rate.
yeah, so when the new aldermen came
Years
in,
ago.
that, and when the new aldermen were elected, that
No increase in salary.
session,
One person.
when the new aldermen were elected at a given session, I can't remember which one it was, but it was after an election, the raises that were given across the time period of that previous term was given to those aldermen that came in, and I guess aldermen across the board. So, because what normally happens is because members of the Board of Aldermen vote on raises that happen during the year, like across the board raises, they don't get it during their term, because then they're actually giving themselves a raise. So after they're re-elected, that's when the raise would come into effect. So what's been going on, according to the budget director, and correct me if I'm wrong, the raises that have been happening over the past 6, 7 years, whatever it is, have been merit raises, not across the board raises. So in that case, I don't think, according to the budget director, that's not what they've been applying
I'm
to
just telling you what the
elected
numbers are.
officials.
Personnel director, we could inform you a little bit more detail of that, but yeah, that's essentially what it is.
Well, I think I get asked the question by the general public, and I've just never known the answer when the last time the Board of Aldermen, when the salary increased for the Board of Aldermen, and I think it would be useful just to
Does
know.
Mr. Payne have that answer?
Yeah, it was 10 or 8 years ago. It was-
Something, yeah,
It was 11 years.
again, as Mr. Shepherd described, basically it was this. First of all, state law prevents anyone who's an incumbent to get a raise while they're serving that particular term. So it'd be the next following term. Now, what would have happened was that anytime a city employee would have gotten an across-the-board increase, it's not this merit-based that they've been doing in more recent years, but the across-the-board increase. Those increases over the time, which occurred during your term, 4 years, whatever, and then the next term, you would have gotten that bump, whatever it is. It may have been 8% or something, whatever that.
Or whoever won would get.
Yeah, it would be, the salary for the position would be adjusted based on the raises, the across-the-board raises that occurred since the last election. As Tom just mentioned, the mechanism for raises in the last 8 or 10 years has been this merit-based matrix increase. And it's based upon an evapersonnel, which isn't an across-the-board. So,
We don't
It
get
doesn't
that.
affect.
no, it doesn't. But what I'm saying is, and personnel can confirm that in terms of when it occurred. But that's the primary reason why it's occurred.
I'll get details from personnel on the exact specifics.
I would appreciate
but
it just
that's-
to be able to answer
that's
that question.
Pretty much how it went. It's
And
happened in
then
the last.
just
10
the last
years.
question is, I know there have been some members of the Board of Aldermen who have asked to have taken some training or, development, conferences and things of that nature. Is that listed in here, and is that something that members of the Board of Aldermen can participate in?
There's an education and training account. It's 5646 under contractual and other services. It's usually been budgeted at 4,000. Yeah, I think when, maybe 10 years ago, it was lower than that, or 12. It got increased to 4,000. And as you can see in FY17, 3,100 of that was spent, and FY18, $715 of that was spent. So currently, right now, it's at 4,000, but it's up to the members of the Ways and Means Committee if they want to recommend an increase to that.
That's all the questions I have, really.
You're not gonna answer about stamps?
No, that's not here.
Thank you for reminding me.
That's,
That's
all right, Alderman Muhammad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Use mine.
Thank you. Even when you look at our budget and you compare it across every other city agency or offices, we are still the most underfunded, which I don't like. And I get we always try to show the public that we can spend wisely and budget wisely, but I think that negatively affects the performance and services we give to the public. We have staff that are overworked. We have staff that are doing 5 to 6 jobs. Even when you look at the salaries and the requested amount, to me, it's still underpaid. Even looking at our chief automatic clerk, $90,000, when you compare this to any other major city with a
City managers.
professional legislative body who has clerks over their body, $90,000 is a insult, a slap in the face. Secretaries who have several aldermen making $40,000, that's not good enough. I think that we need to look at our entire budget when it comes to the Board of Aldermen, so we can be proactive and proficient. And I don't think that we are currently, but I get it. We always try to show the public that we can spend wisely, but again, that poorly affects our services in which we give to the public. That's all I have.
Yeah, and I agree. And like I said before, we've recently, I think it's in the last 3 years, we added 3 positions, which we didn't have before. And I've been in discussions, brief discussions with the clerk, and next budget year, after having time to look at everything, there will be some changes that are offered for the budget. But another thing is, we just like it was discussed, ENA approves additions to the budget, has to approve additions to the budget. And, you know, the Ways and Means makes a cut. And I'll just tell you, when we added the 2 positions that we added, we got some pushback from one of the members of the Board of M&A when we did it. It was a big, even though they have, you know, numerous staff, they did get some pushback to that, but we ended up, you know, we fought for it and we got it. So just, you know, keep that in mind when someone's asking for extra positions in their budget, that, you know, we had a little difficulty getting positions added on.
Would that be the legislative researcher position?
That and the financial analyst.
And that's it. So even when you look at our legislative researcher, who I guess would be responsible for legislative research or assisting on, I guess assisting on general counsel in preparation of board bills, what quality of work do we actually plan to get with $30,000? And so, I mean, is that full-time or part-time?
It'll be full-time. And
$30,000?
yeah, somebody more of a, you know, in library sciences or something like that, that can, good at, you know, just research alone.
Yes, I think we just need to look at this budget. We need to allocate some real money. And I agree with Dr. from the 20th, we need to look at our salaries too, because whoever said this was a part-time job, it's a lie. Yeah, so
The
and
next
even with
the next go around will have about twice as many constituents also, so.
and even with office supplies, yeah, I plan on fighting that too. But even with office supplies, only 45,000. If I go 3 pages over and I look at Slate, which has one floor and 1520, they're at 150,000. Again, I get it. We try to always show the public that we can save money, but to me, perception is everything. Even when people walk into our chambers or they walk into the community room, just overall perception is poor and not a good representation of the president or of the Board of Aldermen. I just really wish that we would look at our budget more detailed.
I'm willing to sit down with anyone and take a look and see what we can move some money for that.
I don't think so.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Alderman Clark Hubbard.
No question.
All right. Did you, Alderman Spencer, you have a question
Nope, that's
in regard to that? Okay. What you point out is this office retail lease. I'm guessing that's for equipment, not for space in your budget. Copier machine, yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Okay. At this point, with no further questions of Mr. Shepherd, we can adjourn the meeting.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
So we adjourn till tomorrow.
10 o'clock
We
tomorrow.
don't need to go through the whole list.
10 a.m.
10 o'clock tomorrow.
These 2 committees.
Leave this in my office.
Every day.
All right, we adjourn till tomorrow at 10 a.m. 10 a.m.
You got to buy.
I love you.